Hello everyone, welcome to Conscious Wisdom, and we are here to support you every day. When your children don't appreciate you or ignore you, it's not the time to get angry or try to teach them a lesson. Instead, follow this approach. I assure you it will be effective. In today's families, the dynamics between parents and children often face numerous obstacles. In particular, as children reach adulthood and seek their independence, parents often feel confused and disoriented. This feeling intensifies even more when children show disdain or pull away. The relationship between parents and children is a process of gradual separation and, at the same time, a continuous learning journey. In the book The Invisible Man, it is mentioned that as children become more independent, parents tend to feel lonelier. Nevertheless, parents learn to be understanding and often say to you, "I'm fine, don't worry, go on with your life." Over time, our children grow up and become adults, causing the distance between us to widen, sometimes manifesting in disrespect or estrangement. In the face of these changes, it is normal to experience a profound sense of loss, confusion, or even frustration. However, it is essential not to get angry or over-rationalize. Just remember 6 words that can help resolve many disagreements. First, don't get angry. Stay calm and smile. In the famous TV show Season Change, I was struck by a young protagonist named Wang Jingze. He was born into an extremely wealthy family and grew up surrounded by luxury, but his parents, always busy, rarely showed interest in his education. He used to run away from home, cause trouble, and fight, which became habitual for him. He had no respect for others, not even for his own parents. On his first day in the program, when he arrived in the countryside and the team was organizing his luggage, Wang Jingze lost control and ended up hitting someone. Upon arriving at his grandfather's house in the countryside, he maintained a defiant and arrogant attitude. The village grandmother, with good intentions, prepared a meal for him, but he responded with derogatory remarks. He said, "I, Wang Jingze, would rather starve to death, die outside, or jump off of here than eat something you made." In response to the lack of respect shown by the city boy, the grandfather and grandmother of the countryside did not get angry. Instead, they faced him with a smile and set about preparing a delicious meal for him again. Later, the village grandmother walked for 3 hours on mountain paths, caring for Wang Jingze with all her love and wishing he would work hard in his studies. After more than a month of living this experience, the unconditional and silent love of his grandparents touched his heart, and he began to let go of his rebellion and resentment. When he returned to his home in the city, Wang Jingze became more understanding and started reaching out to his parents, seeking reconciliation and wishing to spend more time with them. Over time, Wang Jingze kept in touch with the countryside family that had taken him in, and the grandparents always kept him in their thoughts, sending him greetings on every occasion. When children do not show you respect or ignore you, the most important thing is to manage your emotions. Anger will not solve the problem and will only harm your relationship with them. Warmth and love are the most effective ways to dissolve resentment in the hearts of children. This reminds me of the experience shared by host Dong Yuhui about a class he taught in the past. At the beginning of the lesson, the students were making noise, which interfered with its development. A girl in the front row kept banging her books on the desk, creating an irritating noise, and then she began to cough loudly. Dong Yuhui mentioned that at that moment he realized that the easiest solution would be to shout at her and kick her out of the classroom. However, he chose understanding and offered her his greatest kindness. He gave her cough drops and asked her to take care of her health. Shortly after, the class returned to calm for the rest of the session. Napoleon used to say, "Those who can master their emotions are greater than generals who conquer cities." People who maintain serenity not only minimize conflicts with their children but also find more effective solutions to problems. If you want your children to respect and care for you, it is essential to learn to manage your temper. In any circumstance, do not let your emotions control you. Over time, a loud and authoritative voice does not always mean that one is right. Sometimes, choosing silence can be the most effective response. Foster peace in your family and let time decide who is right. Only with harmony at home can difficulties be overcome. Secondly, avoid arguments, hold back your objections. Stepping back is the best strategy. Benjamin Franklin said that disputes are a game between people. However, it's a peculiar game in which no one really wins. Many people are patient with strangers but not with their loved ones, especially in the parent-child dynamic, where it's easy to lose one's temper and end up in disagreements. Lin, an elderly man at home, used to complain that his daughter was becoming increasingly distant and that any conversation ended in a fight. The truth is that when his daughter tried to share her daily life with him, he constantly interrupted her, saying things like, "Stop playing, you're an adult now, why don't you find a partner? You make me feel embarrassed in front of others." When his daughter expressed her desire to change jobs, he responded with critical questions. Why can't you stick to a job? Young people should learn to be persistent. One day, Lin became excited about learning to edit videos, but when his daughter tried to teach him, he quickly lost his patience. At that moment, Lin complained, "What's the use of you studying so much? Now that you have freedom, you don't want to teach me something so simple." Every time they tried to communicate, the conversation ended in a heated argument, and both ended up separated and upset. Over time, Lin's daughter became increasingly reserved, and due to her father's constant criticisms, she ended up completely shutting down. Some parents are excessively rigid with their children, preventing them from making mistakes or making their own decisions. When children display rebellious attitudes, parents often respond with even more severity, leading to more challenging reactions from the children. This will only intensify the conflicts between them. As parents, when your children do not show you respect or pay attention to you, it is essential to adopt an objective stance. If you have made a mistake, acknowledge it and set a good example for your children. If they are in the wrong, do not use your authority to impose your opinion, as this will only increase their rebellion. Hold back your objections and remain firm but calm. This way, you can guide your children towards self-reflection. Before continuing, remember to like the video if you are enjoying it, and subscribe to the channel for the best tips on attracting abundance and prosperity into your life. Let's move on. The French author François de La Rochefoucauld once expressed, "To think that two people can share the same thoughts, judgments, and desires is the most ridiculous idea. It is neither feasible nor desirable." Often, disagreements between parents and children do not focus on who is right, but rather that each generation has its own customs and responsibilities. These discrepancies are often the cause of generational gaps, making it difficult for both parties to reach an agreement on their perspectives. Young people, due to their lack of experience, may dismiss their parents' advice, while older adults tend to become more inflexible and repetitive over time. In this situation, the best thing we can do is demonstrate greater empathy and tolerance, control our urge to argue with our children, and establish a distance that is comfortable for both. As stated in The Awakening of Parents, it is crucial that we gradually transform into the type of parent that suits our children's needs. Over time, as they mature and we age, it is important that we understand the challenges they face in their daily lives and learn to accept their negative emotions. Instead of getting caught up in everyday difficulties with our children, it is preferable to focus on enjoying the time we still share. Taking care of our emotions and our physical well-being, as well as developing a good plan for our lives in old age, is the wisest choice we can make at this time. Thirdly, it is better to remain silent and live our lives privately. Schopenhauer wrote in The Wisdom of Life, "We should keep our personal affairs secret. Everything that our acquaintances cannot observe with their own eyes, we should not share." Every household has difficulties, and when others hear about them, instead of showing understanding, they often become a subject of ridicule. If this information reaches our children, it will only intensify family conflicts. During the reign of Guangxu in the Qing dynasty, in the eastern village of Tongzhou, there was a family that sustained themselves by leasing agricultural land. The farmer, Xixia, had 2 sons and 3 daughters. The 3 daughters were already married, while the 2 sons remained single. This farmer never attended a private school in his youth and enjoyed discussing family matters with his neighbors in his daily life. His 2 sons were afraid of him and often fought with him, and they enjoyed playing cards and frequently didn't come home until late at night. Tired and upset, the farmer's wife often complained to her neighbors about her sons. It didn't take long for the whole village to learn of the reputation of the family's disobedient sons. Soon, the 2 sons reached the appropriate age to marry, and the farmer's wife did everything she could to find suitable partners for them, hoping that marriage would make them more responsible and mature. However, the whole village knew about her sons' misconduct, so no family wanted to marry their daughters to them. In reality, even though her sons enjoyed playing cards, they never shied away from hard work, and despite occasional arguments, when their mother fell ill, both took care of her tirelessly. But, as the saying goes, good deeds are not propagated, while bad deeds travel 1,000 miles. The farmer's wife's complaints became a scandal known to all, which not only affected her reputation but also harmed her sons, making their chances of marriage difficult. Some children may display an indifferent or disrespectful attitude toward their parents, but deep down, they still wish to be valued by them. If parents continuously highlight their children's mistakes or shortcomings in public, they will only undermine their children's self-esteem. In more critical situations, children may fall into a state of self-deception or resignation. As parents, we must adopt an understanding stance. Family conflicts should be resolved within the home, avoiding exposing children's weaknesses to others. In a family, it is essential to be understanding and patient with one another and to be cautious with our words towards the outside. Regardless of the quality of the relationship with our children, we must always safeguard their dignity and prevent others from intervening or criticizing. The home is a sanctuary, a space of refuge. To maintain harmony and family tranquility, it is vital to protect and care for the family's privacy. Members of the household must support one another, only in this way will coexistence improve over time. In the book Before You Leave, it is mentioned that the relationship between parents and children is a process of gradual separation but also represents a path of growth and learning for both parties. The relationship between parents and children throughout life is filled with both pleasant and difficult moments. As children seek their independence, it is normal for parents to experience feelings of loneliness and confusion. However, this should not mark the end of the bond but rather the beginning of a wiser and more mature connection. In a truly balanced family, time is not wasted on trivial disputes or confrontations. Understanding parents, when dealing with their children's lack of respect or emotional distance, react with calmness and without anger, without the need to emerge victorious in every discussion. The father's attitude and the mother's emotions influence the future of the children and the family's expectations. With calmness, empathy, and patience, we can not only preserve harmony at home but also be a model of emotional stability and reasonableness for our children. In life, we long for more understanding and tolerance and less criticism and complaints. In this way, together we can create a warm and happy home. I am 65 years old and took care of my daughter's children for a decade. An event revealed the true nature of my daughter and son-in-law. My name is He Xiuyu, I am 65 years old, and I was a primary school teacher. I have been retired for over 10 years and receive a monthly pension of more than 4,800 yuan. My husband passed away many years ago, and to prevent a new marriage from affecting my daughter, I decided to remain alone. After my daughter got married, I considered the possibility of finding someone to enjoy my golden years with, but my daughter did not support that idea. She told me that remarrying would only mean being a free babysitter for some man and that I wouldn't get anything in return. At that time, I thought about remarrying since I had a close friend with whom I got along very well. He wanted us to live together, and I thought he was a suitable person, so I was willing to give it a try. However, since my daughter disagreed, I decided to set it aside. My daughter mentioned that if I ever felt too lonely, I could help her with the care of her children, and she and her husband would take care of me in my old age. So, when my grandson was born, I began taking care of him, and that became my life for the next 10 years. Living in my daughter's house is even more exhausting than when I worked. Before, I had 2 days off a week, plus winter and summer vacations and other holidays. In contrast, in my daughter's house, I am in a state of continuous work, from Monday to Sunday, from morning to night, with not a single day off. Although it may sound exaggerated, sometimes I feel like I don't even have a moment to breathe. Although my daughter and her husband give me money for monthly expenses, it's only 3,000 yuan, which is not enough to cover everything. I spend that amount solely on food. For other expenses, I have to rely on my pension. Depleting my pension each month is already a lot, but sometimes I even have to use my savings for retirement. In these 10 years living in my daughter's house, I have spent enough to have bought a house. However, money comes and goes, and my daughter is my only family. When I grow old, I will depend on her, so if I don't spend on her, who else would I spend on? But my perspective changed after a traffic accident. In April of that year, I had an accident while riding my scooter to buy food. I got dizzy, lost focus, and ended up crashing into a car. Fortunately, the driver was very kind and took me to the hospital immediately. On the way to the hospital, I called my daughter and her husband. They arrived shortly after I was admitted. At first, I felt relieved, thinking they were worried about my well-being, but what they said was not what I expected. "Mom, who hit you? Were you able to see the license plate? We have to make sure that person pays." They seemed more interested in getting compensation than in my health. I replied, exhausted, it was no one's fault. I was the one who got dizzy and crashed into someone else's car. They didn't ask me to pay for the damages, and besides, they took me to the hospital. We should be grateful for that. I fractured my fibula and will take months to recover, so I won't be able to thank them in person for a while. I gave them that person's contact number and asked them to go in my place, buy a gift, and give them a red envelope as a gesture of thanks. My daughter and her husband fell silent and did not respond. Shortly after, my son-in-law's phone rang, and he apologized, saying he had work matters to attend to, and then he left. I spent almost 2 weeks in the hospital, and aside from that first visit, my son-in-law did not come back to see me. My daughter explained that her company was very busy and that she couldn't find the time. She wasn't much better, she didn't even take a day off to come take care of me. Every day she just called to ask how I was, and during my stay in the hospital, her visits were so few that I can count them on one hand. My daughter's house is only 3 kilometers from the hospital. I shared a room with an elderly lady who always thought I had no children. Every time her daughter brought her food, she offered me some too. I never clarified that I did have a daughter, but the truth is that I felt like I didn't have one. When it was time for my discharge, I called my daughter and her husband to take care of the medical expenses. I spent so much time in the hospital that the bill exceeded 30,000 yuan. Although I can recover some of it, I still have to pay more than 10,000 out of my own pocket. My daughter and her husband tried to offer me help, but their response left me disillusioned. My son-in-law said to me, "Mom, we would like to help you, but our salaries are not very high and we have many financial commitments, our account is empty, and we really haven't been able to save. We want to help, but we can't. My son-in-law earns 7,000 a month, and my daughter a little over 5,000. They only give me 3,000 a month for expenses, so it's evident that they have higher incomes, they just aren't willing to help me more." I told my daughter, "After so many years of sleepless nights and sacrifices for you, I have always respected your decisions. I have always been there for you when you needed me. I feel that I have been a good mother and have not failed you. You have to know that in these last 10 years I have invested a lot in you. Now that I have no money, don't you think you should help me?" I expressed what I felt, but she showed no interest in supporting me. Instead, she insisted that I should understand her situation and not put pressure on her. At that moment, I felt my heart growing cold towards my daughter. After so many years living together, I had already understood that I could not depend on her. She appreciates what I give her, but she has never tried to put herself in my shoes, she just takes without it affecting her in the slightest. Despite everything, I still hold great hopes for her. Perhaps that's what maternal love means. No matter how our children are, we can never distance ourselves from them. However, with this situation, I finally realized that my daughter is not someone I can fully trust. I am her mother, but her priorities are only her husband and her children. I have done so much for her, and she is not even willing to contribute to my medical expenses. Is it possible that in the future she will provide me with support? I don't need to ponder this, I already know that reality will not match my wishes. The day I was discharged, I didn't contact my daughter or her partner. Instead, I called my older sister to come pick me up. She arrived with my 2 grandchildren and took me to her home. Since I still have an injured leg, living on my own would be difficult. I just wanted to hire a nurse for a couple of months until my leg healed. However, my sister decided to stay and take care of me, preparing healthy meals to aid in my recovery. My 2 grandchildren also visit me frequently. I feel envious of my sister, her children are very attentive. Although she is somewhat older than me, she seems younger. I think this may be because worrying less contributes to slower aging. My relationship with my daughter is a reality I cannot change. What I can truly do is live my life the best I can, and from this moment on, I will save my money for myself and won't invest a single cent in her. After all, I am 65 years old, so it's not too late to open my eyes. My mother passed away 3 years ago, and at 72, my father decided to marry a 48-year-old caregiver. One day, I mentioned that the caregiver had left. Before, I thought it was positive that my father was marrying her, as she seemed genuinely interested in him and not just for his money or his house. However, when my sister, Su Mingyu, explained the situation to the caregiver, she left without looking back. Then my father realized that it had all been an illusion. Now I find myself in a similar situation. My father, 3 years after my mother's passing, wants to marry this caregiver he has been dating for 6 months, claiming that she has great love for him. So I said something to the caregiver, who, while packing her luggage, left without looking back, and my father still insists that I am ruining his beautiful love story. My name is Su Jing, I am 52 years old, and I retired 2 years ago. My only son is still in school. My husband continues to work, and I am an only child. In my childhood, I was like a little gem. My parents showered me with love during my upbringing. They gifted me toys, enrolled me in English classes, and took piano lessons. In short, among my friends, I was the only child, and everyone looked at me with envy. Over time, while my mother was hospitalized, I deeply understood the complications of being an only child. On one hand, I have the responsibility of taking care of my parents, and on the other, I must look after my in-laws, as well as my husband and son. Sometimes I really feel that fate is unfair for not bestowing all the blessings on one person. In my youth, I enjoyed happiness, but upon reaching middle age, I must face the challenges that others have gone through. Before continuing, remember to like the video if you are enjoying it, and subscribe to the channel for the best tips on how to attract abundance and prosperity into your life. Let's move on. When my mother fell ill, I decided to take a long leave to provide the care she needed. My in-laws were not pleased with my decision, but my husband supported me. He mentioned that being filial is something to do at the right time. Once the parents are gone, there is no opportunity to fulfill that responsibility. After my mother passed away, I tried to convince my father to come live with me, but he refused. He said he needed to take care of the whole family and manage his daily routine, so the best option was to hire a caregiver. At first, the caregivers I found for my father were older women, over 50, who only came to his home to prepare 3 meals a day and do a bit of cleaning. After my retirement, I used to visit my father regularly and noticed that he had changed caregivers. This new caregiver was younger. I initially thought she was over 30, but upon conversation, I realized she was 48 years old and divorced. However, she didn't seem to have as complicated a life as she claimed, nor did she look like a typical 48-year-old woman. I examined her ID and also found it strange, so I inquired about who had presented it to my father. The caregiver mentioned that it had been a domestic service agency, so I asked her which one. After a while, she was unable to provide me with the name, and in the end, it was my father who commented that other people had introduced her. It turned out to be a distant relative from her hometown, who, after her divorce, had no income and decided to become a caregiver. I asked the caregiver what she had done before. She replied that she was a woman from the countryside and that, in that role, she had taken care of children and performed household tasks. However, when I observed her hands, which were softer than mine, I questioned how it was possible that she had worked in the fields. I left my father's house, bought a few things, and went to a neighbor's house to gather more information about this caregiver. The neighbor told me that he didn't know much either, just that she was a distant relative of his family. I asked him if the caregiver was really 48 years old and if she had always lived at home. He replied that he couldn't confirm that. It wasn't long before my father called me to come home because he wanted to talk about something with me. My father told me that he wanted to marry the caregiver, that he wanted to offer her a cozy home and find support in his old age. I asked the caregiver if she shouldn't consult her children, and she replied that she had no children, that she had divorced, and that was why she was forced to leave her home. I suggested to my father that he go to the park to play chess with the neighbor while I talked to the caregiver. My father pressured me to speak in front of him, so I told him that I had no intention of doing something ridiculous, that I didn't want to discuss personal matters about women. The caregiver looked at me in astonishment, not understanding what I was plotting, while she fidgeted on the sofa. After accompanying my father to the elevator, I turned to the caregiver and told her that I had talked to the neighbor. She asked me what I had gone to do with him. I replied that the neighbor had mentioned that she had 3 children, so I didn't understand why she claimed she had none. The caregiver became anxious and didn't know where to put her hands. I then told her, "This house has been in my name since my mother passed away." I also mentioned that my father only had his monthly pension and about 20,000 yuan in savings, everything else was in my name. If she didn't tell me the truth, I could call the police or choose to fire her. The caregiver immediately got up from the sofa and handed me a paper on which she had written some dates in a scrawl. I observed her silently, and she clarified that it was a record of her time with my father. I had seen that kind of trick many times on the internet. I asked her to wait a moment and told her I would show her something interesting. I took out the security camera recordings from the house so that the caregiver could see her own performance. She entered the house to collect her belongings and didn't forget to request that I pay her salary for this month. I told her that she had only worked half a month, and if she wanted to receive the full amount, she needed to say goodbye to my father properly. She went to the kitchen to prepare food, and after lunch, she would tell my father whatever she needed. When my father returned home for lunch, he noticed that there was tension between us and asked me what was going on. I told him that the caregiver would explain it to him. After eating, I went to rest in my room, allowing the two of them to have a conversation. The caregiver informed my father that her mother in the village had called to say she was in the hospital, so she needed to go back to keep her company. Upon hearing what the caregiver said, my father generously took a good sum of money from his nightstand to give it to her. She knew she was probably being recorded, so she refused the money, claiming that she had already been paid her salary for this month. My father, being so kind, insisted that he should give her something, and although I didn't want to intervene, it was only about 1,000 or 2,000 yuan. The caregiver called from the living room, "Sister, I'm leaving," so I got up to go out, wishing her a good trip without following her. My father remained on the sofa, confused and reflective, and I knew he didn't want her to leave. No matter how much my parents had loved each other, in the end, older men also need companionship. I understood and supported my father's desire to find a partner, but not this type of woman who builds her relationships on disloyalty. In reality, the neighbor never mentioned that the caregiver had 3 children. I was the one who asked the questions. Insincere people tend to be the most cautious. Moreover, the fact that I showed her the camera recordings was to clarify who was deceiving whom. Among women, there are things that don't need to be explicitly stated, there are implicit understandings. Nevertheless, my father felt very sad. At that moment, I wondered if I should reveal the truth to the caregiver. If I said nothing, my father would continue to think well of her, but if I told her, it could hurt her pride. Anyway, now that I was retired, I could stay a couple more months with my father and then decide my next steps. I called my husband and explained what was happening with my father, telling him that I was going to stay a bit longer with him. I asked him to talk to my in-laws and say nice things, and I also thanked him for his support. After all, saying pleasant things had no repercussions, and the essential thing was that everyone was happy. If someone finds themselves in a situation similar to my father's, it's always crucial to consider the feelings and dignity of the elderly. We must not act impulsively and hurt those we love. Well, that's all for today's talk. I appreciate your attention, and I hope what I shared resonated with you. For those friends who are subscribed, don't forget to hit subscribe, so we can be with you every day. Let's grow together, let's be happy together, and let's move forward step by step. Until next time.